Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayeti, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, te namam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Today we begin with verse number 7. So these two verses in the Gita, verse 7 and 8 of chapter 4, have been quoted very often because these two verses, among most Vedanta texts, give a very clear and unambiguous declaration about the idea of the divine incarnation. We have seen in the earlier verses in our previous class how Krishna describes the spiritual lineage along which these Gita teaching was given, starting right from Vivaswan, who is identified with the deity behind the sun. And so Arjuna's question was, how could you have given this teaching to Vivasvat, who is so much older than you? You were not even born then. And then Krishna tells Arjuna, both you and I have been born many times before. This is not our first birth. And that's true for us as well. The only difference Krishna tells Arjuna is that I remember all my past births and you don't. Now that already Krishna is already pointing out in a pretty clear terms to Arjuna that although historically you and I are more or less same age, historically I'm your cousin, but in some significant ways I'm a little bit different from you. And then in the earlier verse, he says, verse 6, even though I am birthless, changeless, and also the ruler of beings, I take birth by my own Maya after controlling nature. And we saw that this is one way in many texts that distinguish our being born and the divine taking birth as an avatar. That we are controlled by our karma, which is why it's so much of a struggle to find our way outside this almost inexorable law of karma and its effect. And we have to struggle hard to transcend that. But when Krishna takes a human birth, as human beings just looks as if they are same. But his birth is not controlled by karma because he is the controller of Maya. Whereas in our case, it's the Maya that seems to be controlling us at present. And now he says, he's already declared that he is the controller of Maya. Now, how and why the avatar occurs is declared in these verses. So verse 7. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. O descendant of Bharata, I manifest myself when there is a decline of dharma and a rise of adharma. Many people of this and the past generation have not really looked at the Mahabharata from going to the original in Sanskrit. For many people, the knowledge of Mahabharata comes in the several translations, but also several condensations. The Mahabharata itself is at least 100,000 verses. So it's a pretty long text. And so what most of us end up doing is reading some condensed version of it. Or even easier, if you have more time and interest, to watch a long-running TV serial which had become very famous in the mid-80s. And I think a second version of that has come more recently. And in that earlier version of the TV serial of Mahabharata, this verse was the opening title sequence. This verse was repeated ad nauseum. So even if people don't know the entire Gita, and this one verse is definitely familiar to most people. So he says, I manifest myself when there is a decline of dharma and rise of adharma. Now, a very important term comes here. Again, not a very unfamiliar term, but a term that is so vast in many ways that it's difficult to translate it with a single word in English. Sometimes dharma gets translated as religion. A lot can be said about that translation because the word religion comes from a very different conceptual framework than the word dharma. But anyway, but that's kind of a current way of thinking, and it doesn't do too much harm. But one way the word dharma gets translated is as religion. But the word dharma is a lot more than what we understand today as religion. Dharma encompasses the idea of duty, because a lot of times sometimes it's quite customary. It just seems a little bit natural in many Indian languages. So a lot of them will say, this is my dharma I have to do. And what really they mean is, this is my duty. And so dharma is used in the sense of duty. It's used in the sense of truth, of justice. So it really encompasses a large area. In general, we could say everything that represents what is good, represents what is right. That is encapsulated by this term dharma. Now, there is a much older term in the Vedas called ritam. Now, ritam is this eternal, transcendent harmony that is present eternally. And so what we can say is that those people whom we see as enlightened, they have touched that rhythm, that harmony, that rhythm, and that's where they dwell. And that's why in rhythm there is no contradiction of any kind. So it's just harmony. There is absolutely no tension, no stress, no worry about the past, present, or future. It's just a one harmonious, truthful existence. Now, in later texts, and this rhythm, the world harmonious order, didn't have an opposite. Normally, we have to come down a little bit to the relative plane to be in this polarized existence. Which is why then, once we come down to the plane in which you and I are, the world, of course, people do speak about a polarized society, but in a much subtler sense, the polarization already exists, because every concept we have, every experience we have, has a polar opposite to it. We speak about what is good, then there is bad, or that it's something that is good or evil. We speak about love, but there is opposite, hatred exists. We speak about light, there is darkness. So you can see the world in which you and I live, there is happiness, there is sorrow. There's always these opposites. But rhythm, that oldest term in the Veda, didn't have any opposite, because that was beyond these pairs of opposites. But then when you come down to the level of dharma, which stands for everything that is good and right, but it has by this time, the opposite, adharma, the opposite of everything that is contrary to what is good and right. And so Krishna says that in this world in which you and I live, we find there is goodness, but there is also evil. And more or less, again, there is no way to measure it, more or less, they remain in balance. And as long as they remain in balance, there is some chance for us to evolve. Sometimes we might say, why have evil? If just everything is good, that would be the best. Um, yeah, I mean, if we had any option to edit the way the world was created, we probably could have done that. Swami Vivekananda, as a teenager, once said, as teenagers sometimes do, said, I could have created a better world than God. Um, and it seems as if, why did God even create this kind of a world in which we are? It's not, it's great in many ways, also terrible in many ways. And the idea is, if only goodness remains and evil disappears, then this world will not be the kind of world that we call the world. It will be a very different entity. So by default, the world in which we live is going to have these pairs of opposites. And both are actually helpful. Just as the goodness in the world teaches us what the ideal is, what we should try to be, the evil in the world teaches us what we should not be, what we should try to avoid being. Not only that, trying to face these wicked forces in the world is what manifests our strength. A lot of times in life, many of us think, oh, I should have everything easily. I should get everything easily in life. And with that, I don't want any difficulties. And that's of course, that's a very natural human desire. But if we look back at our life, we will see that when we were going through this difficult period, tough period, of course, it was not fun when we are in that difficult phase. But in retrospect, when we look back, it is those difficult, challenging periods of our life that bring out the inner strength more. And we become more mature, we become stronger when we have faced these challenges. What you and I are today are the results of not only the great blessings we have had in our life up to this point, but also the many difficulties we have faced and we have overcome. So the strength, the maturity, the wisdom that we have has probably come to us more through facing those challenges than the things that came to us easily. And so every challenge seems like a blessing in disguise. I mean, we look back at it. If we only remembered it when we are passing through that challenge, yes, it's difficult, it's not fun, but then remember that after a few years, I'm going to look at this very experience and say, this is making me stronger. Then we might be able to deal with it in a better way. So what Krishna is saying here is, there are times when this balance between good and bad, dharma and adharma, is disturbed. When adharma, the evil seems to become very high and goodness seems to decline. So the purpose of the avatar, the reason God comes down, is to just restore the balance. Not to eliminate evil totally. It has never happened. So many avatars have come. Evil hasn't disappeared. It's just kind of to restore the balance enough so that those who strive hard will have a right environment, enough challenges, enough support from the field of dharma, enough challenges from the field of adharma, so that we can find our way beyond them. And so that is important to keep in mind. So he says, I manifest myself forth. Srijami, that is the Sanskrit word here. Manifest, and as Krishna has described in the earlier verse, that when Krishna takes birth, when God takes birth, it is done through Maya, which God controls. So it is not through karma. And what is the main purpose of doing it? Although I just already kind of said what it is, that's described more clearly in the next verse, verse 8. Paritrāṇāya sadhūnām vināṣāya ca duṣkrtāṃ dharma samsthapanārthāya sambhavāmi yuge yuge. For the protection of the good and the destruction of the wicked, for establishing dharma, I come into being in every age. So I said, when dharma declines and adharma increases. Now, dharma and adharma are not some concrete entities like this. So when we say dharma declines, what it means is those people who are on the path of dharma, either that number becomes considerably less, or that they are faced with so many challenges that they find it difficult to cope with. So that is what declining of dharma means. That somehow the forces that preserve that which is right and good in the world have been weakened for whatever reason. And adharma increases. And so for the destruction of the wicked, those people who increase the number of evil and wicked acts in the world. And that's how goodness decreases and wickedness increases. So he says, for the destruction of the wicked, for the protection of the good, I come into being in every age. This every age, sambhavami yuge yuge. Yuga is an age or a kalpa or every cycle of, every periodically, historically. And this in some way we could say is one way the Gita approach is a little bit different from the idea. The idea of incarnation is not only a Vedantic or a Gita idea. And in fact, the word incarnation itself, I mean, the Sanskrit word is avatar. We'll see a subtle difference between them. The incarnation, if you go to the root meaning of the term, it means taking a body. It is that which didn't have a bodily form is now taking a bodily form. And so Jesus is seen as an incarnation, not an incarnation, the incarnation in Christianity. So there it's not the idea about something happening in every age, something happening periodically. Well, the Gita idea is something that happens periodically. And the word avatara, avatarana in Sanskrit, it means coming down, the descent of the divine. So while we could say it's taking a body or coming down, but literal meaning of avatara is the divine coming down. Now, of course, we can say in this infinity, what is up and what is down? So everything is said in a very relative sense, of course. And for establishing dharma, so what does establishing dharma mean, and dharma samsthapan? And a lot can be said about this, a lot can be questioned about this. What does establishment of dharma mean when an avatar comes? In Krishna's life itself we see, so traditionally they speak about the four major time frames. And so they are called yuga. And so you have the golden age called Satya Yuga. Then the next is called Treta Yuga, followed that by Dwapara Yuga, and now the last one is called Kali Yuga. And the imagery we find in these texts is that they say that the cow, the Kamadhenu, which is such a venerated animal in the tradition. So the imagery that they provide is in the golden age, the cow was standing on all her four legs, very strongly rooted, in full balance. By the time Treta Yuga came, one of the legs became non-functional. The cow was standing on three legs, still fairly stable. By the time Dwapara Yuga came, so it just shows that there is a kind of a decline already. From the golden age to the Treta, the cow is on now balancing herself on three legs. Dwapara, the cow is balancing on two, still precarious, and that's when Krishna came. And then Kali Yuga, the yuga in which you and I live, cow is somehow managing to balance herself on one leg. And so among this way of understanding that time frame, this seems like we have come in the worst of times in some ways. But I mention this because when they speak about Krishna who came in that Dwapara Yuga, that they say, when did the Kali Yuga start? It started immediately after Krishna's passing. Now, if Krishna came to establish Dharma, we should have seen an upward swing. From Dwapara, it should have gone upstairs. But instead of it going up, after Krishna passed away, the first thing happens is Kali Yuga starts. So objectively, it's not so easy to understand what this establishment of Dharma means. Sure, in Rama and Krishna's case and some of these other very ancient avatars, we see them slaying these demons. So there is a very clear way that they were destroying the wicked people. But that still does not mean that after the descent of the Lord through as Krishna or Rama, all the evil in the world disappeared. That didn't happen. So that's why I said it's essentially not destroying evil totally, but kind of restoring the balance, more or less. So the world's essential character of being a place of good and evil still remains, but they remain more or less in balance. One other question that can come is, if establishing Dharma doesn't mean anything is changing outside, maybe we can look at it in a more internal sense. And that much can be said about that. That when these avatars come, they strengthen the resolve of those people who are in the path of what is right and what is good. So spiritual seekers, people who want to live an ethical, moral, spiritual life, they get a boost, they get the support through this immense power that is released when God comes down as an avatar. So that is one way Dharma gets established not in a society externally, objectively, but it strengthens its presence in the hearts of those who are trying to live an honest, good life. Now, when I say balance, it does not necessarily mean 50-50. 50% of the people are more or less good, 50% of the people are more or less bad. Probably, I don't think it's a matter of numbers. What does make a difference is the amount of goodness and the amount of evil in the world. That's essentially what I mean by keeping in balance. So people who are extraordinarily good, extraordinarily honest, numerically they may be fewer in number. There's a big, large section in the middle, the kind of average people who are more or less good, but also willing to compromise anytime and every time. And then there is, of course, the one smaller chunk who is terrible. And so establishment of Dharma can be understood in that sense as well, that it helps to, and therefore, even a handful of truly enlightened people can balance the wickedness and evil of maybe the majority of the world. And this is important, that when I try to live a good, honest life dedicated to a higher goal, higher purpose, of course I'm benefiting myself, but it's not just myself. That my goodness, my honesty, my living with these higher values and principles is somehow adding to the amount of goodness in the world and somehow balancing whatever evil or thing exists. So we are serving the world, because a lot of times when you use the word service, we usually think it in very concrete terms, which is right. Of course, feeding the hungry, bringing education to the ignorant, all these things are good. That's service. But this is a more subtle kind of service. That me, whether or not my living an honest, good, truthful life, whether or not it is appreciated, whether or not it is recognized, whether or not people around me appreciate who I am, just living that good life, living that life dedicated to God, is itself a service to the world. One place Swami Vivekananda says something which sounds a little provocative, but there's a lot of element of truth to it. He says, the Buddhas and the Christs are but second-rate heroes, because he says, we have no idea how many other people there may have been and still are, who have become enlightened, maybe who are just deep on some mountain top or in some cave or deep in a forest, that they have just become enlightened and they have not come, they haven't written books, they are not giving lectures. So world doesn't even know that they exist. But if such a pure souled person, if that person just even lives deep in a forest and just thinks 5 good thoughts for the world, those thoughts will remain and will do good to the world. So if on some day, without having done anything special about it, we just feel uplifted, we feel a sense of a bhakti or devotion, or we just feel good, and we say, why am I feeling so good today? It's possible that some person, some great soul sitting somewhere, we may never meet that person, never even know that person existed, has been praying for me. And that prayer, that thought, that powerful thought has come somehow and touched me and made me feel happy. So just being honest, good people ourselves is also a form of service. It's not something that is only for my own good. And that's important to keep in mind. And that's what Krishna means here by establishing dharma. That making us this stronger resolve to be honest and good. One question that can clearly come is, why does God have to come down to do all this? God can be up above wherever God is. Nowadays we can do so many things remotely. We human beings can now, all of our programs are being streamed live. Remotely people are sitting at home and watching it. If we can do things remotely, why can't God establish dharma and destroy the wicked and do this remotely? And the answer, of course, is, I don't know. we can ask God why God does that. All that we can say is this, that if we look at history, we do see periodically, not every now and then, not every 5 years or every 10 years, but periodically, some extraordinary beings seem to come and dwell on this planet. And a lot of times we know this only in retrospect. Sometimes even their contemporaries may not recognize that some great soul has come. But when we look back at history, some of these great names, and the names that immediately pop in our mind, at least in the history that we are aware of, are the Buddha, Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, Shankara, Krishna, Rama, of course, if we read these texts, and in more recent times, Chaitanya and Ramakrishna, that when we look at their lives, we see, of course, people extraordinary in many different ways, but it also raises a question that externally they all look like human beings, just like you and me, but they also seem to have immense power, some kind of not necessarily the muscular power, but some immense inner power that we begin to wonder whether they have human beings who have elevated themselves to that very high state, somehow transcended their human limitations, and are now manifesting qualities which look very divine, or they are in fact divine beings who have now come down and somehow voluntarily taken upon themselves these human qualities. So is the avatar a human being who has raised themselves to be divine, or a divine being who has now come down to be a human? The answer, we don't know. And therefore, avatarhood, or this idea of a divine incarnation, cannot be objectively proved. Because someone said, well, what is the evidence whether this person is an avatar or not? And the answer is, no, there is no evidence. The only evidence we have is what we see in history. So the avatar is just one explanation of who these extraordinary beings could be. Now, if that explanation doesn't resonate with people, and it's not as if everyone accepts the idea of avatar, well, then the burden is on them to try to figure out. Some people might say, oh, they were just human beings like us, and they raised themselves to that state. Or maybe just luck. It's a bad luck that I'm like this. It's a good luck Krishna was like that. Again, if that's the explanation that satisfies you, God bless you. So again, there is no, everything that is said about avatar, there is nothing definitive about it in the sense that no one can force the avatarhood of anyone down anyone's gullet. It's just that this is the way I see it. Understanding these people in this manner helps me understand not only their lives, but helps me grow myself. That's really all it is all about. Swami Vivekananda once described, because this question often came up in Sri Ramakrishna's life as well. There were people, of course, as we know, many of us are familiar with Ramakrishna's life here, that there were some people during his lifetime who were proclaiming him to be an avatar. There were some who just didn't care, and there were some who just said impossible. In fact, they thought of him as a kind of a crazy priest who just saw all this. He was hallucinating, seeing all these visions and so on. So there was a range of opinions about who Ramakrishna was. And so once Vivekananda, that time was a young man named Narendra, it was before he had sannyas. So once he described what his understanding of an avatar is, which even when I read this first as a teenager, it seemed to resonate with me, it seemed to make sense. And what he said was simply this, that there are these two branches of science. There is botany, which studies the plant kingdom, and there is zoology, which studies the animal kingdom. And there seems to be a very clear line of demarcation. We rarely have any difficulty identifying a plant and distinguishing it from an animal. But when you go down to this microscopic levels, a stage is reached when at that microscopic level, it's not always easy to know whether a certain entity belongs to the plant kingdom or to the animal kingdom. It's kind of a threshold that separates these two fields of science. And Vivekananda said, that is where their avatar dwells. That we see in the lives of these great ones a lot of incidents, lot of characteristics which seem just like human beings. But we also see a lot of characteristics which look like divine beings. So it's a kind of an interplay between the human and the divine. Sometimes Jesus gets described as the Son of Man and Son of God. Again, to show that intermixing of the human and the divine in the avatar. So verse 9. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. Whoever thus understands my divine birth and action in the right manner is not born again after leaving the body. and comes to me, O Arjuna. By divine birth, Divya Janma is meant birth not associated with karma. And we saw this, how when God takes birth, God is the controller of Maya while we are being controlled by Maya. My birth and action. Now action here means, he said, for the protection of the good, destruction of the wicked. So whoever understands the purpose of an avatar, why an avatar comes, what is the nature of avatar's birth, in the right manner. In the right manner is the Sanskrit word for that is tattvataha. By right manner means if I'm able to understand the truth of an avatar, which helps me go beyond this duality of dharma and adharma, good and bad. You see, it's like this. We live in a polarized world, which is of goodness and evil. And it's obvious that I must try to be good, try to do what is good. I must try to keep away from evil and try not to encourage evil. All that is clear. The more I'm able to eliminate evil from my life, and I become good, the next question is, what do I do with this goodness now? Now I'm all, let's say, all evil from my life is gone. I'm good. Okay, what next? And at that stage, even goodness can become a burden. And this is something we have to keep in mind. The difference between good and bad is the difference between a gold chain and an iron chain. And both chains are capable of binding us. We can fight for all our life and say, I want to be bound only in gold chain. Fine, you are able to get rid of the rusty iron chain. But I'm still bound. So goodness at that stage can become as much a burden. Now, goodness can be transcended. Wickedness cannot be transcended. Wickedness has to be eliminated. This is important. Because we might say, if I have to transcend everything, why do I have to bother to be good? Let me just transcend everything all at once right now. It would be great if we could do that. But evil, so good and evil are opposites, but they are not exactly identical. Now let me explain. If a person does something wicked, some evil, commits some crime, that person has to face the consequences of that crime. That person can't say, I did that thing, but I've now transcended it, so I don't want to go to jail. It doesn't work. You have to go to jail. But let's say I do something good and I get an Emmy or an Oscar. So now, nobody can force it down on me. I can say as an act of protest or whatever, I still have the freedom to say no if I'm being rewarded or awarded with something. But I cannot say no to the punishment I've given if I've committed a crime. So good and evil are different. And so we have to eliminate evil from our life. Try to be on the path of good. But having now become good, we have to transcend that goodness. Because the ultimate truth, ultimate reality lies beyond this duality of good and bad. So while God is good, sounds good, but the Gita probably would say, no, God is not good. Then when God is bad, God is beyond good and bad. God transcends even the idea of good and bad. And that's really what is meant by saying, understanding my action in the right manner. Understanding the place of dharma and adharma and the truth that is present beyond dharma and adharma. Comes to me, O Arjuna. So what does going to Krishna mean? Now sometimes some people take this very literally. And so then of course if we go to Krishna, where does Krishna stay? And so many of these deities, they have their celestial homes. So devotees of Vishnu, he lives in a place called Vaikuntha. Devotees of Shiva is a place called Kailas. In many Vaishnava groups, they see a place of Krishna where Krishna stays as Goloka. And again, there is this kind of provincialism or sectarianism kind of comes up. That's just the human weakness. So I've seen now that you have Vaikuntha for Vishnu, Kailas, and like, so which is higher, which is better, which is 5-star, which is 7-star? That's just ignorant human beings categorizing these things. So I've seen in some places where Krishna is worshipped. So there I've seen diagrams, charts of where does the soul go after death. Again, if it makes sense to you, if you like it, if it benefits you, go for it. But sometimes if it doesn't resonate with you, you might have different ideas about it. So in this chart, sometimes they'll have a place for Vaikuntha, Shiva, and all those places, but they'll be kind of a little bit below. Now, because they worship Krishna, then Krishna will be like on the pinnacle. Krishna's residence will be Goloka, which is who knows where anyone is staying. But again, they come to me, Mam eti, that's a Sanskrit word here. So when Krishna says, such people come to me, if you take it literally, then of course it would mean going to Krishna and maybe in a place called Goloka. Is that the ultimate reality? Some people might say yes. Gita doesn't say so. Gita says, so long as wherever I go, if I go somewhere, and if it's a place, and even if it is like a much bigger place that I'm staying in, it is still a place. It's like if I'm staying now in a studio apartment, just a small place. But then I say, afterwards, I win the lottery and I get a huge house with 200 rooms. It's huge. Of course, I can say, well, I've gone to a bigger place. And that will feel more spacious. I'll feel more happy. But still, no matter how big a house is, it still has walls. It still ends somewhere. It's still limited. And the Gita says, if that state of moksha is a state of complete freedom, then it's not a place. Because if it is a place, it will have some area, it will have some walls, it will still be limited. So I want to go to a place which is not limited. And if it's a place that is not limited, then I can never go there. And so we have to take the word go here, not literally, but figuratively. Just think about simply this. Now, this particular room in which you and I are, compared to the size of the room, our physical size is less. And because we are smaller than this room, it is possible for me to go from one place to another place in the room. But suppose I fill this whole room. If I fill the entire room, I cannot go anywhere in the room. I cannot go from place A to place B because I fill the whole place. Now, what keeps me limited is the body and mind. That's why I can say, I'm sitting on this chair, I'm not on that chair because this body is here and I feel I'm inside this body. But if once I know that I'm not limited by this body and mind, if I'm not limited by this body and mind, then there are no walls, there is no roof over where I exist. In that sense, then I'm everywhere. And if I'm everywhere, I cannot go anywhere. So when Krishna says, after leaving the body, such a person comes to me, if you take it literally, it means you have some higher birth in some higher celestial place. But if you take the inner meaning of that, it means such a person will be liberated. And liberated means what Krishna says, such a person is not born again. If that doesn't sound like an attractive goal, to be not born again, can think about it as you will never die again, which is really the same thing. Because if I'm born, I'll die. If I'm not born, I will not die. So I sometimes feel that some of these ancient texts, if I had any hand in editing it, God bless, I would never want to do that. But rather than saying no birth, I would say no death. Because essentially that's what people want. Anyway, but really it amounts to the same thing. My favorite story about this is that a person once wrote a travelogue. He's a good writer. He had gone to Paris and stayed there for a week and wrote about his experiences there. And very well written travelogue, and it was sold as 7 days in Paris. Somehow the book flopped. No one wanted to buy it. And the publishers worried. They had printed so many copies and no demand. Then they got a brilliant idea. So they recalled all the copies and said, we're issuing a new edition, a new book. And they just changed the title, didn't change anything inside. Simply called it 7 Nights in Paris. The book became a bestseller. Now, of course, if you have spent 7 days in Paris, of course, you also spend 7 nights in Paris. But again, human mind being such is that we somehow think the two things are different. So not being born again is same as not dying again. So we will stop here today. So these 3 verses give as clear a declaration as possible about what an avatar is, why is an avatar born, what does the avatar do, and how do we understand it. Are we freed from all questions and doubts? No. There will still be lots of doubts, lots of questions. But here we find so in some ways we can say the declaration, so to speak, that Sri Ramakrishna made to young Vivekananda shortly before his own passing, that he who was Rama, he who was Krishna, is now born as Ramakrishna in this body. That was a pretty direct way of declaring his own avatarhood. And this is in some ways similar to that. Krishna and Arjuna were close friends, cousins, and now Krishna is declaring in no uncertain terms that he is the avatar. So we'll stop here. If you have any questions, doubts, comments, yeah.
Swamiji. Swamiji, Krishna saying that we must know him makes me wonder who guided Krishna. The way Rama had gurus in his lifetime, did Krishna have any gurus?
Yes. In Krishna's life, we do see he went to, in fact, I think one of his gurus' name was Sandipani. And we find references to that. But Swami Sharadananda, in his that big biography of Ramakrishna, he discusses this, that some of these very old avatars who have kind of now straddled between history and mythology, that the mythological part of their life gets so much more prominence that the historical part kind of recedes into the background. And that is why in Krishna and Rama's life, especially in Krishna's life, we don't get very detailed descriptions about the teachers he had, what spiritual practices he did, and so on. Perhaps, if the trend continues, if human beings continue to be who they are, now that we are fortunate, we are close to Sri Ramakrishna's life, barely little over 100 years. And so we know about when he took a human birth, what spiritual practices he did and the struggles he went through, which inspires us. But maybe if none of us is going to be born again, so no chance. But if we come after 1,000 years or 2,000 years and look at how Ramakrishna's life has evolved after 2,000 years, it might be very different from what we read now. Because again, it's very a human nature to once someone becomes an object of adoration and worship, then the people's understanding, their imagination, their love, their devotion evolves, and stories get kind of attached to the lives of these great ones. And so it's not easy to separate the historical elements from the mythology that is connected with that. And that's one of the reasons you don't get to read a lot about Krishna's spiritual struggles. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so you still have one more week to figure out the mystery of the avatar, and we'll continue to discuss it, because the same idea will be developed further by Krishna in the verses that we see. So we'll continue this next week. We begin with verse 10 when we meet next time. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.